I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. Before we get started, I have an announcement to make. I'm going to be away next week, so of course this is the Saturday show, so as you're listening to it, but I won't be able to get a Q&A or the Bigfoot and History show up this coming week, but I'll be back Saturday, so we'll have a regular Saturday show and we'll be back on schedule. So, having said that, folks, if you go to my YouTube page, William Jevning, or you can look up Creek Devil. We have something like 326 or 27 shows up there. Lots of new listeners, so if you haven't heard those, go check those out. And we will be back next Saturday. So, Devin is our guest today. Tom, would you like to take this over?
Absolutely. Devin is from Oregon, so Devin's a fellow Oregonian, and he has some very interesting experiences with Bigfoot. He also, a man after my own heart, he really enjoys going out and looking for Native American artifacts and petroglyphs, excuse me, of which there's a lot of them in what's called the Oregon High Desert. But before we continue, I want to say if you like the show, please let us know. Subscribe, comment, and click the like and subscribe button. And if you want to support us, you can do that. We've got a link in the description for Patreon. So, and I brought in Forrest today. She's an anthropologist and has an interest in this. So, anyway, I'm going to hand this off to Devin. Devin, why don't we start off with, you and I talked about when you and some friends were up in an area. We don't get really specific, but there's a lot of hot springs in Oregon. You and some friends were kind of chilling, if you can call it that, in the hot springs. You guys had an experience.
Yeah, I have to say, I guess I've heard of quite a few amount of experiences around that area. I was probably about 18 at the time. I'm 24 now, so yeah, I was a little bit younger, and I was with quite a few people. And as we were leaving this hot spring, I guess I had an encounter that definitely changed my perspective on the subject. And then I also had a few vocalizations throughout my life in the Central Oregon area. So yeah, it's been something.
So tell me a little bit about what happened. You guys, tell us the whole thing. And by the way, part of the story is the fact that the hot springs that you're at, it's about a third of a mile to the road. And I've been to those hot springs before. You cannot see the road in any way, shape, or form from the hot springs.
It's difficult to describe because there is a road around there, but I know it's nowhere in the vicinity of where the hot springs itself is. But I was there very late one night with quite a few people, maybe about 4 of us. And after being there for a while, we were kind of ready to get up out of there and heading out. And I noticed what seemed to be like headlights, which was just really catching my attention. And I knew that Oregon doesn't have fireflies, so I don't know what I was looking at. So I kind of spent a couple minutes there observing it, and they seemed to, what I would say, almost projected, almost as if a car headlights would, but like an older set of car headlights, so they weren't like ultra bright. It was very dim. And they were watching us for a good while, and I was just kind of no one else seemed to really notice much or pay much mind to it, but it really boggled my mind, and I was noticing kind of like fluttering, glittery lights around it, which was very interesting, very interesting. Never experienced anything like that. But as we left, we were hearing noises as tree breaks and stuff like that. But what really boggled my mind was the fact that the lights were there, and I know that the road is pretty far down there. So,
Well, weren't they in a direction not where the road would be, but they were into the forest?
Absolutely not. Yeah, right off the edge of the hot spring itself. So literally just at the perimeter of the forest line. So
Okay.
yeah, as far as I'm there, I know it burnt down recently, and you can kind of see exactly where I'm talking about if you look at recent pictures of it, because the hot spring's
Right.
all gone. It's just kind of in a pretty steep hill surrounding that area. So it was, at the time being young, I wasn't sure what the area looked like, and after kind of doing some Google Earthing and seeing the terrain, boggled my mind. There's no way that there could have been something there. So it was something, especially at the time. But yeah, that was.
Well,
that
let me
was
ask
one
you
of my-
this. Did anybody else in your group, and a couple questions I have, you say that it looked like a pair of headlights, but it sounded like there was more than one. So there's like at least one set of, we'll just call them orange eyes watching you guys. But was there more than one set of orange eyes?
I can't say for sure, because what it looked like to me was almost like multiple small ones around it. So possibly, but I almost want to say it looked glittery, so that they were like floating around, moving, possibly just very small. Maybe the radius of the light itself was very small, and that's why I kind of tripped my mind out a bit there. But yeah, it had to have been. It had to have been at least a couple of other things there, or eye shine. I know the only light we had there, I think, was a candle that somebody had lit. So that was kind of the only reference I had of any visual light there. So, but I've heard a lot of interesting things from that area. I've actually had people who were walking back from the hot spring late at night, hearing their names called from the forest, which was very interesting. A buddy of mine had a very interesting story of that. He said, because he has an interesting name. His name is Raven, and he was hearing his name called from the forest, and there was nobody out there. So that was something crazy.
When, now that was at a different time when you guys were there, or was this, when did that happen?
Probably the following year. I wasn't there then, but he told me specifically about that, and I told him about mine. I was like, I had my experience there with those lights and whatnot. I don't know if I could say lights or if it was eye shine or what it could have been, but that was definitely one of the most outlandish experiences when it comes to that. It was interesting.
Okay. And one of the questions that would come to my mind is, he must have been in the woods at some point with somebody else that would have been saying his name or calling his name.
Yeah, from what I gather, I think he was with a couple buddies, and he was one of the last in lines. And yeah, I think being young kids, people, yelling at each other a lot. The name was said a lot, and something picked it up and was giving it back to him. And I was like, dude, you're pretty lucky, man, from what I've heard. So I'm glad you didn't follow that voice.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And how much later?
Yeah,
was it a year later or?
Exactly a year later, and it was probably, I was 18 at the time. It was a few years ago, and then, I know recently a lot of that area has burned down, which is unfortunate, and you can see pictures of it in kind of the exact area I'm talking of. Right outside the line, right outside the pool of the hot springs, there's kind of 3 separate pools. Right outside of it is where I was seeing these, whatever you want to call it, but yes, I have an idea of what it could have been, but no one else seemed to mind. But as a kid, it really got me going and got me looking into the subject. So,
well, and there's, just like you said, there's a lot of reports of Bigfoot in that area, in that entire area.
Yeah, and what I want to bring up, because I just listened to a few of your podcasts from just a little bit ago, the Little Cultish Lake, around that area in the Three Sisters Wilderness, somebody else was talking about their experiences there. And yeah, I agree. I definitely feel like there's quite a lot of activity around that area, and I've been going up there ever since I was in 2nd grade, so yeah.
Well, we had a guy that's been on the show in the past, Lee, and he and I have talked at length about that area, and Little Cultus Lake was one of the areas where he'd had an experience with, he thought he heard young girls laughing, but there's no campground, and it was late at night, so he went out there so what's going on? Hey, you're out in the middle of the woods, you might want to be careful. And every time he would get to where he thought they were, it would go further and further. And then finally he realized, hey, I'm probably being drawn into a situation, maybe an ambush or something. And he turned around and left. So
Yeah,
very
smart of
interesting.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there I've heard a lot of loud, almost like shotgun sounds of tree breaks and things just snapping as a kid. And it's unfortunate. A lot of people I was with, they paid no mind to it. I'm like, really? That was very loud and very, very unusual for an area where there's a lot of no shooting signs, so you know it wasn't guns. And there's an entire side that went right up to the Three Sisters Wilderness where no campsites, no roads, not a lot, nothing. There might be one road, one fire road, but yeah, it's pretty isolated out there.
Well, it really is. And again, it kind of goes back to what we've said all along, and that is the creatures kind of live in this unseen world, hiding in plain sight. So if you know what to look for and what to listen for, all of a sudden it jumps out at you. You know, like those shotgun sounds that shouldn't be there. They're out of place.
Yeah, very out of place. And one thing I've heard is kind of like the meaning behind some of them is what's kind of fascinated me, because probably this summer, I think only just a few weeks ago, I was up there. I was sitting there kind of on one of the beaches hanging out, just kind of enjoying the summer. And because we had a lot of rain out here in Central Oregon for this summer, which was unusual, but good. The lakes need it. So I finally got up there to Little Cultus, and yeah, I heard some knocks, or I guess some loud bangs, but it was funny how it was kind of like grouped in a certain way. It was kind of like 3 consecutive and 1, because it was like there was 3 groups of people together, and I was the one kind of on the outside of the lake by myself. So I think I've heard that there's kind of a meaning behind that, how there's a purpose behind the noise, to kind of give away, like to communicate who's around the vicinity and whatnot.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Will has said time and again, it's definitely that the creatures are talking amongst themselves or communicating amongst themselves, but we're not sure what the specific purpose or what they're trying to say.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to tell.
So in that same area, Three Sisters, and you sent some pictures. Did what happened out there? There's 2 lakes, kind of a set of twin lakes there.
Yeah, the larger, there's Big Cultus and then Little Cultus. Is that the ones you're talking about?
Well, that was one, and then the other was I think Paulina.
Oh, Paulina. Yeah, sorry. That's a little bit east. That's farther east of the Cascades, which I found that was, that was one of the first vocalizations I ever heard. I was, out there when I was about 16 years old. I was in north of the Paulina East Lakes area, down China Hat Road. You kind of take that and it kind of skirts along the top of it for quite a while. And there's a lot of forest roads that go deep into it, kind of heading towards, I guess we'd call Paulina Peak, and all those large slopes that head right up to that area. I was about 16 years old out there by myself. I just finally had gotten my own vehicle, so I was taking it out for a drive and found some cool roads. And that's when I had one of the first most powerful vocalizations in my life that, in all reality, really got me into the subject. I really started digging into it after that, because it was something you could physically feel. So, yeah, I was very.
Tell us about it. What happened?
It was about sunset, and I was funny because it's a lot that goes into the imitation situation. It's about sunset, and I was kind of just hanging out, and I had this Forerunner of mine, and I was just really stoked to be driving. So I just got out in the woods and kind of had a minute to reflect and turned my engine off, and I heard all the coyotes going off around me, and I was like, wow, that's just awesome. I love hearing that. It's such a cool sound, and they're just surrounding me on every side. And then a couple minutes went by, and then I can still, to this day, I can feel the exact direction of this. It was like to the right of me, but slightly behind me. Just this loud Tarzan, just deep howl of something basically imitating the coyotes, I would say. And it just basically dropped my jaw. I was like, wow. I just sorted through every animal in my head I could to kind of come up with a reasonable explanation at the time. I must have been like 16, maybe 15 and a half or whatever it was. We started 16. And yeah, I was just like, I have no explanation for that. And it actually scared me to the point where I literally just turned my car on and got the hell out of there because I didn't know what to think or do. I heard probably 2 good solid ones until I actually was like feeling the vibration of it. And I was like, this thing couldn't be too far, but it sounded like it had to have been a good distance. But yeah, the power got to me, and yeah, I headed home and I dug through every animal sound that is on the internet, and yeah, set me on the Bigfoot path. I actually finally got one. I think it was the Ohio Howl. It was one of the closest things that kind of was similar to it.
Okay, and so it was nothing whatsoever, or was it similar to coyote? You just sit there and you listen to coyotes, and then you hear this, and you're like, okay.
I would say it's similar to the coyote, as if like it was trying to make that noise, but just way too loud to have even been a person trying. It sounded like 10 men together. It was just so powerful. But yeah, it sounded like I guess as if you were trying to imitate a coyote, but just putting all your force into it, like all your lung power. And yeah, that was definitely something, man. It definitely was a jaw-dropping experience being a young kid. And then, yeah, set me on the path. And then I started taking my excursions up into the lakes. And then I was actually always somewhat aware after that, after reading a lot of stories of what's around and noticing stuff. So I had an idea that things were around the Cultus Lakes area and all that. So I was always trying to be very wary to an extent because, yeah, they are a very wild animal, a being, whatever it is. You know, it's got its place, and it knows that it's the boss. I feel like that's the message I got out of my first vocalization. I don't know if it knew I was there or what the deal was with it doing the coyote kind of noise, or if it was just joining in on it, because the coyotes had been going off for like maybe a minute or so before it kind of either joined in or whatnot. But it silenced the coyotes. I know that. I know they got really quiet after that. And then, yeah, that was set me on my path of just indulging into every aspect of this subject as much as I could. That was, yeah, it was awesome. And I think you had told me there's somebody out near the Prineville area. It fascinates me that they're in Eastern Oregon, for one, or even like in some of those random pockets or islands of mountains that we get, which even I'm boggled that there's even water out there. So it's fascinates me that they can flourish out there, or maybe not as much today. Maybe a few years ago, 10 years ago, it was a little easier because, yeah, overpopulation is a big thing here.
Yeah, that area is growing
insanely, and yeah, so
on a rapid expansion.
Yeah.
So you listen to the coyotes and you hear this thing, and what other? Because I think you mentioned something at Cultus or Little Cultus Lake.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to jump around a lot, but it was quite a while ago for me. A Little Cultus, trying to think back, because I've had so many trips up there as a kid. Growing up in Central Oregon, it was just one of those lakes I went to almost every weekend. It was just one of the least populated that you could get up to. So had a lot of camp trips up there, and I know I've always heard things throughout the night, a lot of howls, and I always ask people, like, you sounded like a siren. Did you guys hear that? And no one ever seems to notice. I'm always seem to be the lucky one, I guess. But yeah, they definitely must inhabit that area, because I know once that entire highway system is closed around that area, there's not a lot in perfect area. There's so much water. That's what makes perfect sense to me, is the amount of water that would attract any life. There's a lot of water up there.
Well, tell me a little bit about the siren sounds. That was kind of new.
Tell me about that. I was very young, and it was just like camp throughout the middle of the night. You hear like the kind of like a siren, not like howls like a dog, but like what sounds in my mind is like a siren. Like earthquakes, whatever the tsunami kind of drill siren you get in big cities. That's what I could relate it to, I guess. And that was like, it was nothing too substantial to it, just something I heard sleeping as a kid and stuff throughout my life up in Central Oregon.
Yeah, well, we actually had a guy from Texas that was actually, well, do you remember? I think it was Joe or his girlfriend or somebody that heard the same thing. Thought it sounded like a siren.
Yeah, I have actually heard those sounds too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're fascinating. Especially, I gotta say, the first time hearing it and literally feeling it was, it was something. I'm very grateful for it.
Wow. Okay. So tell us a little bit about you go out there and you also go looking for petroglyphs. Have you found any that have, I'm just curious, anything that looks like it might have feet or something that could denote, possibly a Bigfoot?
Well, what fascinates me is a lot of the ones I found over the years have a lot of depictions of very devil reminiscent characters, which is funny enough. Tons of them, especially near the Cascade Lakes area. There's a lake, Devil's Lake, right off the highway. I found some there. Very recently, I've actually got to go look at a good amount of them kind of up on the cliffs and stuff like that. I actually crawled myself up there to look at them, and yeah, extremely devil reminiscent. Not so much of the feet, like things that are like, I've seen pictures of one of petroglyphs around the Columbia Gorge area, and those have like the definitive eyeballs, the whistling lips, stuff like that. These ones I find fascinating because they really just look like just small people with devil horns, which I just find interesting. I've never heard of such things, but they're all the way from that lake to everything I've seen out in Paisley, Oregon, and all the way into Nevada. There's depictions of these very strange looking things with 4 arms as well. I found the ones on Picture Rock Pass fascinated me because there's a very large devil character with 4 arms. And then there's also, depictions of normal people or sheeps or typical things that are pretty obvious that, you know what they are. And then you get these random entities in there that do fascinate you. I mean, there was some I saw at Fluke Lake recently that almost looked like a praying mantis being. I thought that was fascinating. Very fascinating. Yeah,
absolutely. And I had no idea. I'm going to send these pictures to Forrest here in just a moment. So I want her to kind of weigh in on this.
I'm hoping you guys get to see them. There were a lot of them, and I'm hoping they all keep the same size and all that. Because some of them were great. Some of them are these almost alien-looking beings on there that are just really cool, really trippy.
Yeah.
Tom, can you text those to me? Because because I'm on the phone, I can't get them through on my email.
Oh, okay. I will text them.
I've been here trying to pull them up, and that's the reason I can't see them.
Right.
Okay, gotcha. Cool.
All right, so I'm going to grab a few of these select ones and put them up there. And we may post these on the web later on as well because I think they're well worthwhile.
Yeah, especially some of the lizard ones I thought were awesome.
Oh, they are. Yeah. It's like, wow, these are really cool. I had no idea that we had this much, petroglyphs in Oregon. I usually think of, New Mexico and places like that. So
apparently this is just scratching the surface of what I can gather too. So should have a lot more trips planned in the future.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
This has been a little more recent. I guess in the past 4 years I've been doing this, and it kind of started more with herpetology. I have a buddy that goes and studies some of the crossbreeding ranges of rattlesnakes and horned lizards. So that was the main reason for us going out there, and it was kind of just a side thing. Like we were already out there, and we just happened to read a few books that mentioned where they were at, and then it kind of just started more of a passion after that, because when you're there looking at them, it changes your perspective when you're on the land and you're standing on what it was like back then, because it's a very difficult place to survive. There was water, it was another story, but super fascinating. And then all these beings on there as well that they have depicted next to normal people that, they can tell that that's a human. And then they have quite a few entities that are reoccurring, especially these little smaller devil horned beings, which were really cool. Really cool to see.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's I think it's probably a world into itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what about some of the other people that you know? Have you heard stories from friends or any kind of lore of the area of other people who've encountered the creatures?
Not too much, to be honest. That's why, like, I'm always really grateful to have this conversation and maybe learn some, because I don't know much. I think people are very tight-lipped for a reason, and I guess I understand. And yeah, it comes in. I know that I've read a lot of reports throughout the years of people in this area who have a lot of connections there. But what I've noticed is a lot of reports seem to just go offline after a while. Like they'll be on, for example, the BFRO or something else, and then eventually, a few years later, it's gone. So, yeah, no, I think I would like to. I wish I did. I wish I did know more about it, and especially with having like the Warm Springs Reservation not too far, it would be great to get in touch with somebody who knows about some of the history up there. But I unfortunately don't spend a lot of time working, so it's kind of something I'm intentionally working on now. So hopefully, I will find some connection there.
No, and you're doing a great job. If by nothing else, by pure happenstance, running into the creatures.
Yeah, and actually, what I have been doing on my own recently, there's an area I keep inhabiting. I think it was I would like to give more of an in-depth story to some of the footprints I sent you. I don't know if you could see them. They were like in some icy puddles.
They were. Yes, they were. Yes.
So the story behind that one, because like I mentioned, I was alone driving up this. It's called the Quartzville Backcountry Road, which stretches from Marion Forks, I think, down to Sweet Home, Oregon, kind of along the tips of the mountains down there. And I just had a boredom. I like to go for a drive, and did that, and definitely like to keep my eyes and ears peeled while I'm doing it. And that's what I did. I got a little lucky one time. I happened to see a lot of tree breaks on this road, and I stopped on this kind of like a dirt clearing on top of one of the crests of this hill where you can kind of almost see like Jefferson and Hood and stuff like that. A lot of dirt and wet mud puddles, and I definitely scoured the area. Didn't see much of footprints or anything like that. I know there was like a soccer ball, maybe like a kid had left from a previous camp trip, and I remember the specific area that ball was left. And anyways, I continued on that road. I saw one person camping in a trailer. Anyways, I came back the next morning. I left that road. I came back probably like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was there maybe 9 o'clock the night before, like when sun went down, and came back like sunrise the next day and did that same drive. And that's when I stopped at the same place I was, and everything had frozen over during that night. Everything was wet the night before. That night, whatever it was must have had just walking through that puddle, and then it froze over. And that's when I noticed the soccer ball that I had looked at had been disturbed a little bit, and I noticed those footprints, and you kind of get that feeling, or I was like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't stick around. And I tried to just get a quick snapshot of that, because those were very definitive, and there probably were better ones around, but I didn't feel like sticking around too long to find out. But yeah, so that they must have had just passed through that night, in my opinion, from what I could see clearly. And I was just there the night before, and there was not a trace of anything really, other than maybe what I could notice, tree breaks farther up and down the road. So that was my only hint to there even being any activity.
Well, that's something I want to jump. Excuse me. I kind of want to jump in on. I'd like Will to weigh in on this as well, and that is the value of cold mornings when you have a heavy frost on the ground.
Yeah,
you'll see footprints.
Time of year for that.
Yeah, and then the moment the sun melts the frost, there goes your evidence.
Exactly.
Will, you've run into that. Yeah, up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, we tracked a couple of them for a long time till the sun melted the trail.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, one of the areas that Will and I have researched before, it all started actually with a very 28 degrees, went out and we found footprints. And we came back a couple hours later, the sun had been up, nothing. They're gone.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, it's such a window of time, man. It's like the early bird gets the worm in a way. You do have to get up and and get that sweet spot of time and, and in conditions, because sometimes nature can be on your side. You gotta know what's going on.
Yeah, you sure do.
Yeah.
And it really helps to be where they are when they are.
Exactly. So
overstating the obvious. But
no, if you guys had any info on kind of like some habitation of, because I know what fascinates me is the extremes in differences and elevations here in the Central Oregon area. Like you can go from just very flat, low juniper sagebrush and then all the way up to the top of the Cascades. I'm curious as to what they do throughout certain times of the year, especially when it gets extremely hot here and everybody's up in the mountains. That's kind of where I'm curious about at this point.
Well, Will, what are your thoughts?
Well, what I've noticed is they're usually the air is thinner the higher up you go. So when you feel heat, in the summertime when it's hot, it's actually the air blankets that's being heated. That's what's causing you to sweat and everything. So if you go up higher where there's less air, it's not as warm. So a lot of times they're up higher.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But man, there's a lot of people up there now, especially in the Central Oregon area. They're all just going up in the mountains. I'm surprised there's not more sightings being reported recently.
Well, that's actually a really good point. Here's my thoughts. Unless the creatures intentionally allow themselves to be seen, and Will, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this as well. You can walk right next to them. You can be 30 feet away, and they can be watching you. And the hikers that I've seen, basically, they're just out for a pleasure hike, and they would, if they're not looking for them, they won't notice them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm sure Forrest could certainly weigh in on that one too, and talking about other primate species.
Excuse me. And in regards to what there?
Well, the ability of, for example, some of the other primates that will remain motionless, you can walk right by them.
Oh,
and
okay.
You won't even see them.
I'm sorry, I had missed the comment. I've been having coughing spasms there, so I had turned my phone down. I apologize. Yes, and we've discussed this before, how gorillas and chimpanzees are really specialists at this, that they can just absolutely sit within the foliage and just remain motionless. And you can be within feet of them and walk right past them, and they'll know you're there, but you won't know that they're there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very fascinating.
Yeah,
and I'm sure our natives probably did the same thing.
Oh, big time. Yeah. Yeah, when you get used to your environment, you're definitely the boss. That's for sure. You definitely figure it out. You have an advantage over someone who's new and just coming in, visiting, and spectating, and still intaking it all. Yeah, it definitely makes perfect sense there.
Yeah. Well, I once referred to, I think y'all remember when Bigfoot, I kind of compared to the black ops of the forest.
Exactly. Yeah. The black ops of the forest. Exactly. Hey,
Devin, these footprint pictures, how large were the tracks, do you estimate?
I'm a size 11, and they were definitely twice as big as mine.
Oh, wow.
One of them I had as a comparison that wasn't too big. I think was probably only like a few inches bigger than mine, but the width of it was definitely twice as wide. Unfortunately, I didn't get a ruler or anything to measure. I was just grabbing a quick snapshot, but
sure.
Probably, yeah, over a foot for sure.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say just those ones that happened to go through the puddle. I noticed there was more, especially there was some movement around whatever soccer ball I had noticed was there, and I kind of like went up close to it and looked at it, and like for whatever reason that was completely like moved around and disturbed once I got back. So that was interesting, and and they all seem to go in this like passing in one direction, as if they went from the tree line to the left of the road, to the right, down the cliff on the other side of that little dirt pull off. I guess I would say it wasn't much of a clearing, just kind of a pull off.
Tell me a little bit about those tree breaks that are kind of just look like they're just mashed. Absolutely. This is impossible that this was weather breaks or anything like that. And a person didn't walk up and just
kind of like jammed between the Y of the tree right below it, because that one was something. It looked like clearly a large diameter tree was twisted as if you would twist a toothpick, and then removed and then shoved between the base of the tree it was removed from and another one to create almost like a Y shape with like an upside down A, I guess is that the one that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, actually I'm talking about all of them in the sense that they're just shredded.
Yeah, those were, I think, right, maybe not the exact Quartzville backcountry road, but just maybe a few roads up from that. I kind of just tried to explore as much of the area as I could after finding that out. There was activity. Yeah, I think that was right around the Marion Forks area up one of those roads. I found those guys, all those breaks, just absolutely twisted, and they're like huge diameter. Like you couldn't even attempt to break that, like grabbing it and using all your weight to pull down on it.
Yeah, there's no way. There's
off the side of like a cliff on a road that nobody goes up for any reason other than logging in my mind. So yeah, very isolated area for some very crazy tree breaks. So that was cool. I was pretty stoked to see those, because that's one of those things that I can show to anybody and nobody has ever given me as I could say can give me a good solid answer to.
Yeah, how did this happen? What's the cause of this?
How does it just fall this way, and why would people even for one shove this tree like that between the bottom of this tree that it was broken off of? That didn't make sense to me, but it must be an indicator of some sort, and I'm very curious as to what it means. And what I think I've noticed a lot about some of the tree breaks I find in this area is they all seem to point towards water. So I'm gathering it has maybe something to do with that. I could be wrong, but it seems like or maybe it's just the natural way, or I'm just confusing things. But most of the ones I seem to find seem to, in my mind, look like they're indicating that.
Or when you say water, it's a pointing.
Yeah,
yes,
kind of like
the
trees are broken down face towards the direction of a creek, or let's say that there's a lake nearby or something. They'll all be pointing that direction. I think I found.
Go ahead, Forrest.
The Indians here in Texas do what are used to do, rather, create signal trees out of the oak trees. And they would take one limb and they would pull it down so that it would start growing, and it would point towards a spring or a water source. We had a signal tree actually here in Burnett for a long time until it died and they had to cut it down. But it was a huge, very ancient oak tree that the Comanche Indians in this area had tied down. And so the limb got trained to point towards the water source there at Hamilton Creek. Now, on my particular property, I had the same thing happen because I happen to have artesian wells on my property. And we actually have some Indian sites in the very back of it. And they did the same thing with the oak trees here. So they they pull the limbs down, tie them down until the limb actually straightens out, and they will grow out and they will point actually directly towards the water source. And other Indians coming behind them will then know where the water sources are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's cool. I heard they'll also do that in ways of also like making platforms and stuff for hunting as well, I've heard, especially here in the area where there's a lot of juniper tree and there's a lot of flat ground. I heard they'll make little platforms so they can get a better view or a sitting point or advantage point.
Now, are you talking about the Native Americans or are you talking about Bigfoot?
Native Americans, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know of anybody climbing up into the juniper trees around here, but except for certain Mr. Harry around here had one of mine all bent down, and I think he'd been sitting up there for a long time observing me and the goings on around here. But the Native Americans around here would have been using oak trees, climbing up into those. The juniper trees, the cedar trees are not that substantial that you'd want to be able to do that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant more for this area because in certain parts there's nothing but juniper. So yeah. Gotcha.
Can I ask you a question too? I'm looking at this one that's got red on it. Now this looks more to be what I would call a pictograph. But the rock has kind of a strip through it that looks like it is red, and I can't tell if it's the rock or whether these drawings are done in red ochre, which would make these pictographs.
Some of them I looked to me like a little bit of both. There was one large boulder that had the definite carvings like engraved into it with red ochre, like as if it was placed into it to give it more visual substantiation or whatever it may be. But yeah, there was only one that I noticed that the majority of the ones that were red were flat, weren't carved in. There were quite a few. One of them was from, I think, Picasso Canyon here in Eastern Oregon.
Yeah. I had actually gone up into the Columbia River Gorge, and I had seen some of the petroglyphs up there. But I don't know. Tom didn't tell you, I actually have a degree in archaeology as well. So, and I did my field school in southern Utah. So we have lots of pictographs and petroglyphs and all that good stuff in there. And I see a lot of the similarity in some of the symbolism here too, as well.
Definitely. Yeah. I think from what I found, I have quite a few books that kind of, what it seems like a lot of the stuff farther north is a lot more of the facial depictions where you get eyeballs, mouths, and face. And then farther south, it's just a lot more thinner lines, circles, and like zigzags and stuff like that. So that is pretty fascinating that area has some very, very detailed depictions of faces there, and especially large, just strange hominids.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through these. There's just some interesting ones here. Now, you talked about the horned. That's a fairly common thing you see as well in southwestern archaeology. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's a portrayal of an individual with, say, buffalo horns or some kind of set of horns on its head, or the Four Corners region. They have a interesting little character called Cocopelli, and he can appear sometimes as a multi-armed character with long antennas coming off of his head, and he's actually a rain god. And so I don't know that much about northwestern United States Indian tribes, so I don't know whether they would be maybe picturing the same individual, or just doing it in a different fashion. I don't know.
Exactly. That's extremely fascinating that you know that. Yeah, that's what I seem to think, because it's depicted from quite a long range of area, all the way from the Cascades all the way to the east, way to the east, all the way down towards Nevada. And yeah, it's unfortunate. I wish I knew more people who had some insight to the folklore of what exactly was there, because I think it's Picture Rock Pass is the specific one that a lot of people have looked into, and they don't have any info or any background as to what the story is behind that being. But it's a four arms being with large horns, and that sounds exactly like the Cocopelli to a T almost.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a rain god. That very well may be what they're depicting. I don't know,
Yeah. The one I found at Fluke Lake was very interesting, because there was quite a few depictions where there was normal people, and then what looked as if like a doorway was between them and then this being. Like there was two lines and then dots between the two lines. And then there was this large kind of praying mantis looking being that was one of the most fascinating out of all of them I found there. And there's ones where I thought I got a picture of it. There was a person which it looked like was falling upside down, That was pretty cool. I wonder what the background story was to that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this one that has the very large individual, very blocky body, and the individual has, I say he, I'm assuming it's a he, has his arms raised up over his head. Probably know which one I'm talking about. And then everything around him is much smaller.
Yeah, and then one of the small guys next to him is just a normal being, but with horns. And then they'll have sheep, and they'll have deer. They'll have things that you can tell are quadruped animals. But then you get this one guy there that's is just
he's enormously bigger than everything else is.
Exactly.
What
yeah.
is it they were trying to pretend?
So I know. So I wish I knew a little bit more to the background to that. But that's fascinating. I'm glad that you had that information. Thank you.
Forrest, what can you tell us about just some of the animals that are on here? I see one. I don't know if you've received that one yet or not. It looks like a Zybex. You know, the ram with the absolutely enormous horns.
Are they called orbix?
Yeah.
Hey, I was just scrolling back to that. You know what? I'm going to say, well, we don't have any of those that appear. Those come from Africa. It's funny that you even mentioned those because one of the game ranches out here was going to get feed on Tuesday, and we saw a whole herd of them out there. But you know what I'm thinking that may be? I'm seeing a pronghorn. Do y'all have pronghorn out there in eastern Oregon and Washington and that area?
Yes, but they are skittish, extremely skittish. But yes, we do have them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at that, and that's what I was thinking that might be portraying.
So what I'd like to add to that, I think
the one with the individual with
horn, or it could be the bighorn sheep, because where that area I think those were taken was near the Heart Mountain Antelope Refuge, which they do have a lot of pronghorn, and I think it's one of the only places with bighorn sheep left, I think, in this area.
Yeah.
So it could be that, but again, I don't know how long ago they were around, and if they weren't extinct at some point due to overhunting. I don't know the full history behind it, because I know there's been a lot of effort into conserving them up here in Eastern Oregon.
Well, I'm sure in native times they were probably more than plentiful. Most of your megafauna was long gone before these type of petroglyphs were done, so you wouldn't see any of that up here. So I'm thinking that's probably either bighorn sheep or although now the ones when they portray the bighorn sheep down in Utah and New Mexico and Arizona, you usually do get more of a curl on the horn in the horn area than this. These look to me like they're just sticking straight up. So if I'm looking at the same one you are, so. It's interesting.
Yeah, very fascinating. Yeah, because when you're there, it's like you just think that there's no way people were just staying here. It was just obviously a place of either passing through, or the environment was just way more prosperous back then. And clearly it was. There was water and stuff like that, but it's still mind-boggling. I think it's such a rough, rugged terrain to think that these people walked that far across this entire state. And it's not even, compared to the rest of the country. Yeah, it's very fascinating. And then these similar depictions of these similar beings all across the land. I love it. I think it's extremely fascinating, and love to get any more information I could.
Well, you'd be surprised at some of the things that human beings will go to produce art, because we actually found a ledge, and I mean, it was up on a precipice that, I didn't even really want to go up there at first. The guys in our group talked me into it and said, "Oh, we'll help you up here." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." Because I won't lie to you, I'm scared of heights. And so I finally went up there, and it was this. It wasn't. You really couldn't even call it a cave. It was just kind of a hollowed out portion in the sandstone there. But somebody had gone to. Well, I'm probably sure that there were multiple somebodies. but there were hand prints all over this wall. I mean, there were hundreds of them, not one, not two, but hundreds of them.
Wow.
And done in black and then in red ochre. And I mean, it was unbelievable, just all different sizes of hands. So, multiple people had been up there doing that. But then you got caves in France where they went in and some of the magnificent art, and they crawled through little bitty places to get back into these caverns to do their artwork. And they had, what kind of torches or lamps were they using back there to create all this marvelous artwork that they do?
Pretty ballsy, in my opinion.
Go to pretty weird extents to do stuff sometimes. But, I'm looking at this one here, and of course, now you saw it, so you tell me. I mean, it almost looks like it's a circle within a circle, although one circle, the outer circle looks completed, but the inner circle doesn't. And then it looks to me like it's got a tail off of it. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I think so. Yeah, there's a few that have, like almost like a little devil tail kind of thing. Yeah, there's that one. Yeah. And then there's like a small one, I think not far from that, actually. I remember there's like a little, almost looks like an astronaut helmet with eyeballs inside of it and two arms sticking out of the side. I think that was along the same area as that exact one that you're talking about. But yeah, the little circle. Yeah, I do remember that one. And I don't know what to think about some of those. And then what I think I have gathered about some of the circles is that it's a solar representation of the certain time of year and stuff like that. But still, it's sometimes some of them are just too different and too hard to tell.
Well, I know down in the Southwest, they've got some really amazing circles and then designs and stuff. And now, you ask even the Hopis, Zunis, Navajos down there, all the Pueblo peoples, they don't really even themselves know what all these pictograms and petroglyphs and all that actually stand for. But
exactly.
Some of the strange things is that they're now starting to coordinate. They have these forensic geologists that go down there, and they can actually can tell, because of the depth of the etchings on the stone, what the age was. I mean, they didn't even have this kind of stuff when I was going to school. So this is a new field that's opened up that was not even available to us. But they have come along and said that they think that there was some sort of an astronomical event that these people saw, and that it might represent some type of plasma that was appearing in the air, because that's what they think that these circular and these diagrams were representing. And I'm just wondering if maybe some of this, that circle and stuff, could be maybe some of the same thing.
Exactly. That's very fascinating, because what I've read, especially about the specific one of the being with the four arms and the horns on picture past rock, is that there's such a wide range of when this could have been done, because they have no idea if it was the Paiutes or Modocs or Klamaths, because they all kind of intertwined through that area and we're constantly traveling. They have no idea. So it would be nice to know kind of a closer time reference to when that exact picture was done, to get an idea of who was the person that did it. And I think, especially in the Oregon area, I think there were definitely people around who witnessed, for example, Mount Mazama that caused Crater Lake. That would have been something. I imagine that probably caused a lot of natural phenomenon that ended up in some of the rock art down there, especially with all the ash, because that probably was something. You probably thought your gods were mad at you or something like that, because that was probably something else. That was a big one.
Well, I'm just looking at this Tom questioned whether it was a turtle. That just came through. Do turtles have 3 toes? I don't know. I'm sorry. I thought they had more toes than that. I'm looking at a little oval shaped animal with 4 legs, and it appears like it only has 3 toes on every foot.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There might have been turtles here back then. I don't know if they had 3 toes, but I know there's some good depictions of the horned lizards here. And even then, I'm not sure exactly how many toes they had. But yeah, and then there's also these frog things that have like gills kind of coming out of the side of them too. I'm not quite sure what some of those are as well, but
Salamanders, maybe.
yeah, probably. I must be. And that, so what it seems like I've gathered is it really everything on these rocks, at least here in the Eastern Oregon part, is the animals that were around at the certain times they were here. And I think with some of the circles were, depending on where the breaks were and stuff like that, was the time of year. And also the dots. I think I found that because you'll see certain parts of rocks, they just have like literally a square of dots of like, and there'll be 21 or something like that. And I think that has something to do with the June or July, a certain time of year. I don't know exact the specifications behind it. But that was one thing I've learned recently.
Solar.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder what the barbell, this little barbell sign is. Now that is new to me. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, some of them are way out there and don't seem to even look like the rest of them, like as if it was a separate tribe or a separate time frame it was made. So they do make you wonder.
Well, I'll tell you something in archaeology that used to really kind of aggravate me, and that everything had to have a symbolic, a religious reason for it having to exist. And you know what? How many of us as children doodled? And how do we know that Indians weren't just doodling? And I think sometimes some of these are just doodles.
I'm glad you brought that up, because actually one of the other most recent things I have learned is that they are starting to figure out a majority, especially like how you brought up the handprint ones somewhere. With the size, majority of the beings making these pictures were children. So that makes absolute perfect sense, is they just really are just doodles, because you gotta have some fun or utilize your time one way or another, especially when you're a kid back then. So yeah, I think they're finding that out. It's just kids were doodling, but there was probably more to that, because you see that some of them were specifically designed in what looked like the living room area of like let's say the giant boulder was surrounded by rocks, so there must have been some form of a building there, so it must have been the living room or a ceremony kind of situation. So some of them were more obviously detailed like an adult did it, but a lot of them must be just kids just having fun, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think I don't think that everything that they ever did always had to have symbolic meaning.
Exactly.
Humans are humans. I mean, we create graffiti everywhere, so they're even finding graffiti in the
kids that spray paint on the bridges and stuff in New York. You're like, how did you get up there to do that? It makes you wonder.
Well, guys, this is a great conversation. Interesting show. We got a little bit off we started off on Bigfoot and kind of got into an interesting, more of a archaeological, anthropological discussion on some of the rock art here in Oregon and where it came from, possible meanings. I love the doodles. Forrest, Devin, I think you guys are right. A lot of this is just having fun. Any final questions for us, Devin, before we wrap this up?
Oh man, to be honest, I just would like to know if you guys have any advice on what to look for when I'm out there, because that's kind of my goal for the next few months here, is getting out as much as possible and staying safe, because I think we definitely have some areas worth looking at. So that's kind of my goal. If you guys have any advice, I could appreciate that.
Well, I think number one advice was the staying safe, and that is not going alone.
Big time, yeah.
You live in Bend, or you live in Central Oregon. You got to know all the. There's just every year people vanish, and it's always, almost without exception, it's somebody by themselves. So, yeah, go with friends.
Absolutely. All righty, cool. Yeah, I think that's about all I had.
Awesome. Well, Devin, I want you to stay in touch, and why don't you stay on after the show, and we'll talk a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I think that'll be a wrap.
In Bigfoot history, Nikoman Island, near Mission, British Columbia, May 31st, 1965. Mrs. Seraphin Jasper told me she saw a Sasquatch in a field across the highway from a home in daylight. It was tall, covered with black hair. It kept moving around, and the cows tended to wander over and stare at it. It scared her to keep watching it, and she did not see it leave.
Welcome. This story is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. The name of this story, Two Tales of the Yeho. Curious Legend of the Kentucky Mountains, 4 or 5 versions of this curious and strange legend come into my collection over a period of about 6 years, 1948 to 1954, from an isolated region of the Kentucky mountains. At first I did not know what to make of it, but having also collected a few versions of The Bear's Son, story minus the half-bear, half-man introduction, I guessed that this was the introduction now broken away and told separately. It now appears to be a distinct legend, since Dr. Archer Taylor refers me to the long search for American versions by Mr. Rudolph Atrocci. And now that I reflect on this item, I realize that it is not unique to Kentucky mountain folklore. During my youth in these mountains, it was not unusual to hear a rumor of some half-wild man, naked and hairy, being found in the woods, living close to animal state. This kind of Romulus Remus legend seems to stick in the minds of the folk, but how this particular legend made its way into eastern Kentucky is a mystery to me. The following version was taken down in pencil in 1950 from the lips of Lee Maggard, who lived in a small cabin on the south slope of the Pine Mountain Range near the small lumber town of Putney, Harlan County, Kentucky. He had heard it on Maggard's Branch, Leslie County, Kentucky. The Yeho. Once there was man out hunting. He got lost, and after a while he began to get hungry. He came to a big hole in the ground, and he thought he would venture down into it. He went down in there, and he found that the old Yeho lived in there. There was deer meat hanging up and other food piled around the walls. The man was afraid at first, but Yeho didn't bother him, and he went toward that meat to get him some. The Yeho walked over and looked at the knife and said, "Yeho, Yeho," a time or two. He cut it off a piece of the meat, and he started eating it. Well, the man stepped over to the middle of the pit and took out his flint and built him up a fire. And the Yeho watched him and looked at the fire and at the flint and said, "Yeho, Yeho," again. The man put his meat on a stick and broiled him a nice piece and started eating it. The Yeho watched him and acted like it wanted a piece. The man cut it off a piece of the broiled meat and reached it over. And the Yeho commenced to eating it up and smacking its lips and saying, "Yeho, Yeho." Well, the man lived there with it a long time, and they got along all right. After so long, there was a young'un born to him, and it was half man and half Yeho. And the Yeho took such a liking to the man, it wouldn't let him leave. He got to wanting to get away and go back home. One day he slipped off, and the Yeho followed him and made him go back. Went on that way for a good while, but he picked him a good time and slipped away. This time he got to the shore where there was a ship ready to sail, He got on the ship, and he looked, and he saw the Yeho coming with a young'un. It screamed and hollered for him to come back, and when it saw he wasn't going to come, why, it just tore the baby in two and held it out, one half to him, and said, "Yeho, Yeho!" He sailed on off and left it standing there. The version that Dr. Taylor refers to in my book, South from Hell for Sartain, is called The Origin of Man. Another version was given to me by this teller's grandson. It has the same title and contents, except that the Yeho has 6 children and tears them all in two and throws them after the embarked man. Another text, similar to the one given above, was accidentally erased from my tapes. The following text was recorded from Joe Couch, Appalachia, Virginia, in 1954. He had heard it from his people while he lived in Perry County, Kentucky. The Hairy Woman. One time I was prowling in the wilderness, wandering about, kindly got lost, and so weak and hungry I couldn't go. When it began to get cool, I found a big cave and crawled back in there to get warm. Crawled back in and come upon a leaf bed, and I dozed off to sleep. I heard an awful racket coming into that cave, and something come in and crawled right over me and laid down like a big old bear. It was a hairy thing, and when it laid down, it went chomp, chomp, chawing on something. I thought to myself, I'll see what it is and find out what it's eating. I reached over, and a hairy-like woman was there eating chestnuts. Had about a half a bushel there. I got me a big handful of them and went to chewing on them too. Well, in a few minutes, she handed me over another big handful, and I eat chestnuts until I was kindly full and wasn't hungry any more. Directly, she got up and took off and out of sight. Well, I stayed on there till next morning, and she come in with a young deer. Brought it in, and with her big long fingernails she ripped its hide and skinned it, and then she sliced the good lean meat and handed me a bite to eat. I kindly slipped it behind me, afraid to eat it raw and afraid not to eat it, being she give it to me. She'd cut off big pieces of deer meat and eat it raw. Well, I laid back, and the other pieces she give me over as she eaten hers. She was going to see that I didn't starve. When she got gone again, I built up a little fire and broiled my meat. After being hungry for 2 or 3 days, it was good cooked. Yes, buddy. She come in while I had a fire. She come in while I had my fire built, broiling my meat, and she run right into that fire. She couldn't understand because it kindly burnt her a little. She jumped back and looked at me like she was going to run through me. I said, "Uh-oh, I'm going to get in trouble now." Well, it was cold and bad out, so I just stayed another night with her. She was a woman, but was right hairy all over. After several days, I learned her how to broil meat, and that fire would burn her. She got shy of the fire, and got so she liked broiled meat and wouldn't eat it raw anymore. We went on through the winter that way. She would go out and carry in deer and bear. So I lived there about 2 years, and when we had a little kid, one side of it was hairy, and the other side was slick. I took a notion I'd leave there and go back home. I began to build me a boat to go away across the lake in. One time after I had left, I took a notion I'd slip back and see what she was doing. I went out to the edge of the cliff and looked down into the mountain, and it looked like 2 or 3 dozen of hairy people coming up the hill. They were all pressing her, and she would push them back. They wanted to come on up and come in. I was scared to death, afraid they was going to kill me. She made them go back and wouldn't let them come up and interfere. Well, I took a notion to leave one day when my boat was ready. I told her one day I was going to leave. She followed me down to my boat and watched me get ready to go away. She was crying, wanting me to stay. I said, "No, I'm tired of the jungles. I'm going back to civilization again, going back." When she knowed she wasn't going to keep me there, she just grabbed the little one and tore it right open with her nails, throwed me the hairy part, and she kept the slick side. That's the end of that story. This is the end of the story. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out